At exactly 12:17 a.m., a black luxury car stopped beside a tired single dad walking home from work. The window rolled down, and the most powerful billionaire CEO in New York whispered, "I was declared dead, but only you can keep me alive." Ethan Cole had mastered the art of being unnoticed. Every morning before sunrise, while most of the city still slept behind locked doors and blackout curtains, he was already awake, tying his worn-out work boots in a small two-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of laundry detergent and cheap coffee. His 8-year-old son Noah slept in the next room, hugging the same dinosaur plush toy he had owned since kindergarten. Ethan would stand at the doorway for a few seconds each morning, just watching him breathe, as if reassuring himself that at least one thing in his life was still whole. 3 years earlier, cancer had taken Noah's mother, and with her went the softness in Ethan's world. Since then, life had become a schedule of survival. Construction work during the day, food delivery at night, homework supervision in between. He had no space for grief anymore. Grief required time, and time cost money. At construction sites, Ethan blended into concrete and steel. He worked hard, spoke little, and left quietly. The other workers joked about promotions, vacations, and sports bets. Ethan calculated grocery totals in his head and wondered whether Noah's shoes would last another month. He never complained. Complaining did not change numbers on bills. After his shift, while others drove home to families or bars, he switched to his second job, delivering meals across Manhattan in his aging sedan. The city at night felt different to him, colder somehow, as if wealth and loneliness shared the same skyline. He drove past glass towers glowing gold against the dark sky and sometimes imagined what it would feel like to live in one of those high floors where problems probably came with lawyers, and not late notices. One stormy evening, rain fell so heavily that the streets blurred under the headlights. Ethan had just completed his final delivery when he noticed something unusual along a quiet roadside, near an industrial stretch of the city. At first, he thought it was debris from the storm. Then he saw movement. A woman was lying near the curb, partially shielded by shadows, her clothes soaked, her hair clinging to her face. He slowed instinctively. In a city that taught people to mind their own business, stopping could mean trouble. But something about the way she tried to sit up and then collapsed again cut through his caution. He parked and stepped out into the rain. Up close, he saw she was injured, her hands trembling, eyes filled with panic rather than pain. She looked expensive in a way that didn't match the empty street. Not just her clothes, but the way she carried herself even in weakness. When he asked if she needed an ambulance, she grabbed his wrist with surprising urgency and whispered no. No hospital. No police. Please. There was fear in her voice, the kind that didn't come from a simple accident. Ethan hesitated. Every logical instinct told him to walk away. He had a child at home. He couldn't invite unknown danger into his life, but logic had never been the reason. He did the right thing. He helped her into his car and drove her to his apartment. It was small, modest, and far from the polished world she likely belonged to. He gave her dry clothes that once belonged to his late wife and set up blankets on the couch. She barely spoke, only thanking him in a voice strained by exhaustion. He noticed bruises along her arm, faint but deliberate, as if someone had held her too tightly. He wanted to ask questions, but something told him silence was the kindness she needed most. That night, Ethan barely slept. He sat at the kitchen table, listening for movement, wondering who she was running from. Around dawn, when pale light filtered through the blinds, he must have drifted off. When he woke again, the couch was empty. The borrowed clothes were folded neatly. On the table sat a simple, handwritten note. "You saved my life. I will not forget this." There was no name, no number. Nothing else. Ethan stared at the note for a long time before folding it and placing it inside a drawer. He told himself it had been nothing more than a strange moment in a hard life. People with complicated problems lived in different worlds. His world was simple: work, son, survival. Weeks later, headlines exploded across every screen in the city. A billionaire CEO had died in a tragic private jet crash overseas. Her photo filled news channels, social media, and newspaper stands. Ethan almost dropped his coffee when he saw her face. It was the woman from the roadside. The world mourned Isabella Laurent as a visionary lost too soon. Markets trembled. Commentators analyzed her legacy. Ethan sat in stunned silence, realizing that the fragile, terrified woman who had slept on his couch had supposedly died days. Later, in a fiery crash, he looked at the folded note again that night. "You saved my life." He had no idea that the story was far from over. And he certainly didn't know that one day, at exactly 12:17 a.m., a black luxury car would stop beside him. And the woman the world had buried would look into his eyes and whisper words that would change everything. The world buried Isabella Laurent with elegance. Her memorial was broadcast across continents, attended by political leaders, industry giants, and celebrities who spoke about her brilliance, her discipline, her vision. News anchors called it one of the most tragic losses in modern corporate history. The footage of her private jet exploding mid-air played on every major network for days, flames tearing through the sky before vanishing into smoke and ocean. Analysts discussed the sudden crash as a mechanical failure. The company she built from nothing trembled overnight. Stocks dropped sharply. Investors panicked. Within 48 hours, the board of directors announced temporary leadership under the chief financial officer, Marcus Hale, until a permanent structure could be decided. The world moved quickly, as it always did. Tragedy became headline. Headline became memory. Isabella Laurent was officially declared dead, but Isabella Laurent was very much alive. The crash had been real, but the story behind it was not. Days before the flight, Isabella had sensed something shifting beneath the polished surface of her empire. Closed-door meetings she was not invited to. Financial summaries that seemed to clean. Subtle resistance to her decisions from executives who once agreed without hesitation. She had built Laurent Technologies with precision and relentless control. And that control was slipping in ways too quiet to ignore. The final warning came when an internal auditor she trusted disappeared suddenly, resigning without explanation after requesting access to restricted transfer records. Isabella began her own discreet investigation. What she found made her blood run cold. Millions rerouted through shell accounts. Insurance policies modified weeks before her scheduled overseas flight. Clauses buried in corporate bylaws that transferred. Expanded authority to the CFO in the event of her sudden death. Her death, the realization, was not dramatic. It was slow and suffocating. She was not facing competition. She was facing removal. On the day of the flight, she made a decision that saved her life. Through a loyal private security consultant whose family she had once helped quietly, she arranged an exit before boarding. A body double entered the aircraft while Isabella was transported elsewhere under secrecy. The explosion that followed was no accident. It was a confirmation. Someone wanted absolute certainty, but survival came with a cost. To the world, she was ashes scattered over ocean water. Legally deceased. Financial control immediately shifted. The board expressed grief while consolidating power. Marcus Hale appeared composed during interviews, promising stability and honoring her legacy. Isabella watched from a hidden location, every statement cutting deeper than the crash itself. The company she had nurtured was being reshaped in her absence, and the men responsible believed they had won. Remaining alive was more dangerous than dying. If she revealed herself without undeniable proof, she would be accused of fraud. market manipulation, even mental instability. Her enemies would claim trauma had broken her mind. They controlled internal data, legal teams, security infrastructure. They had prepared for this scenario. She could not simply walk into a press conference and reclaim her name. She needed evidence strong enough to survive public scrutiny and criminal defense. During those first weeks in hiding, she changed locations constantly. Safe apartments arranged quietly. No digital trail. No direct contact with anyone from her past. Every unfamiliar car outside made her pulse quicken. Every unknown number felt like surveillance. Wealth had once insulated her from fear. Now it magnified it. The more powerful you are, the more valuable your disappearance becomes. One night, as she reviewed archived financial copies she had secretly stored offline before the flight, a memory returned with startling clarity. Rain, a roadside. A man who asked no questions. Ethan. She had escaped a containment attempt shortly after landing in New York, days before the staged crash. Her security contact had been compromised earlier than expected. She ran, in heels, through unfamiliar industrial streets. When exhaustion and injury overtook her, she expected betrayal from the first person who found her. Instead, she found silence, warmth, and a couch in a small apartment that smelled like detergent and something heartbreakingly normal. Ethan had not recognized her. He had not searched her name. He had not tried to benefit. He simply helped in a world where loyalty had price tags. His had none. As Isabella dug deeper into financial trails, she discovered something alarming. Internal security footage from weeks earlier had been reviewed repeatedly by someone in upper management. The timestamp corresponded to the night she escaped near the roadside. Camera feeds from surrounding streets had been accessed. Her enemies were retracing the gap in their plan. They were looking for proof of survival. And the only civilian connection linking that night to her existence was Ethan Cole. If they identified him fully, he would become leverage. Or worse, for months she stayed away, telling herself distance would protect him. But when encrypted chatter between board executives referenced unresolved variables, she understood the danger had shifted. They suspected. Not confirmed, but suspected. She could not fight alone anymore. She needed someone invisible to them. Someone they would never imagine as a threat. Someone who had already proven his character without knowing her status. At 12:17 a.m. After verifying she was not followed, Isabella Laurent stepped out of a black sedan and instructed her driver to pull toward a familiar construction route where a tired single father often walked home from his late shift. When the window lowered and Ethan recognized the face the world had buried. Shock replaced exhaustion. Her voice was steady but fragile when she spoke. "I was declared dead," she said softly. "But if they discover I survived without protection, I won't stay that way for long." The war for her life was no longer corporate. It was personal. Ethan stood frozen on the sidewalk as the city noise faded into a distant hum. His mind struggling to reconcile the woman in front of him with the headlines he had seen weeks ago. Isabella Laurent, the billionaire declared dead in a fiery crash, was sitting inches away, alive, breathing, and looking at him, not as a CEO, but as someone cornered by forces larger than wealth. The streetlight above flickered softly, casting pale gold across her face. And for the first time, he noticed something he had missed months earlier on that rainy night. Beneath her composure was exhaustion, not the kind caused by long meetings or public pressure, but the kind born from betrayal. She stepped out of the car, dismissing the driver. And the luxury vehicle rolled away quietly, leaving them alone on the near-empty street. "I didn't come to ruin your life," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "I came because you're already part of it." Ethan's first instinct was anger. He had worked too hard to keep his world small and controlled. His son was safe. Their routine was steady. He did not want billion-dollar conspiracies bleeding into his kitchen. But when she explained that internal security teams had accessed surveillance from the area where he found her, something inside him tightened. "They're reviewing footage from that night," she continued. "They don't know it was you yet. But they know I didn't vanish cleanly." The word cleanly unsettled him, as if her death had been a project that failed to meet expectations. They walked slowly as she spoke, careful not to remain in one place too long. Isabella explained how the board members responsible for staging the crash believed all loose ends had been tied. The body double, the sealed investigation, the quick consolidation of power. But anomalies in traffic cameras and private satellite records hinted that someone had helped her escape initial containment. That someone was now an unintentional witness. Ethan stopped walking. "You should have stayed away," he said quietly. "If they find out I helped you, my son pays the price." Isabella did not argue. She nodded, as if she had rehearsed that truth repeatedly. "That's why I'm here. Because they're already looking." She handed him a small tablet device displaying blurred screenshots of street footage enhanced from that night. His car was barely visible in one frame, parked near the curb. Not clear enough for identification, but close enough to invite investigation. Ethan felt his pulse rise. He imagined strangers studying his life through screens, analyzing his routine, mapping his habits. The thought of Noah's school bus, of their apartment building entrance, suddenly felt exposed. Isabella's voice softened. "I trusted executives with decades of loyalty. I trusted contracts and signatures. I was wrong. The only person who acted without motive was you." Her words carried no flattery, only fact. She had resources, intelligence, legal teams, hidden in fragments. But she lacked something rarer, someone untouched by corporate corruption. Ethan represented normalcy. No offshore accounts, no board alliances, no political ties. To the conspirators, he was insignificant. And that insignificance was power. He shook his head. "I fix steel beams and deliver takeout. I'm not built for this." A faint, almost sad smile crossed her face. "Neither was I. I built myself into it." The honesty unsettled him more than arrogance would have. She wasn't asking for heroics. She was asking for partnership rooted in survival. Before he could respond, headlights turned the corner slowly, a dark SUV passing at reduced speed. It did not stop, but it did not accelerate either. Ethan recognized the subtle surveillance immediately. Isabella noticed his reaction. "They've increased private monitoring around certain districts," she admitted. "Areas connected to unexplained movement after the crash." The SUV disappeared, but the message lingered. This was no longer theoretical. The danger was active. Ethan's mind raced through practical consequences. Police involvement would expose her without evidence. Ignoring the threat would invite escalation. Running would uproot Noah entirely. Every option felt unstable. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. Isabella met his eyes directly. Access, perspective, and trust. She explained that internal company systems required physical presence for certain archival retrievals. Security protocols flagged all executive-level credentials. Contractors, however, rotated constantly. Maintenance workers, delivery staff, infrastructure inspectors. Invisible roles. Roles like Ethan's. He almost laughed at the irony. His entire life, he had felt overlooked. Now invisibility was a strategic advantage. "If I say no," he asked quietly. Isabella did not hesitate. "Then I disappear again, and you hope they never identify you. But if they do, you face them alone." The honesty hit harder than persuasion. She wasn't manipulating him with fear. She was presenting reality. Silence settled between them, thick but not hostile. Ethan imagined Noah's face. He imagined explaining to his son one day why he had walked away when action might have prevented greater danger. Courage was not something Ethan associated with himself. Responsibility was. And sometimes responsibility demanded stepping forward, not back. He exhaled slowly. "You get one thing clear," he said. "My son comes first. Always." Isabella nodded without hesitation. "Then we build every step around that." For the first time that night, the tension between them shifted slightly. Not gone, but aligned. Two people from opposite ends of the economic universe standing on the same uncertain ground. A billionaire stripped of status. A single father pulled into a war he never asked for. Above them, the skyline glittered, unaware that beneath its polished surface, alliances were forming in shadow. Ethan did not fully understand the scale of what he was stepping into. But he understood one simple truth. Walking away would not erase the threat. And if powerful men believed they could erase lives to protect power, then maybe being invisible was exactly how to stop them. The following week unfolded with a precision that made Ethan uneasy, as if he had stepped into a world where every movement required calculation instead of instinct. Isabella arranged everything quietly through one remaining loyal contact inside the company. A senior infrastructure manager who had not been absorbed into the inner circle of the new leadership, through a subcontracting firm that regularly rotated maintenance crews. Ethan secured temporary credentials to enter Laurent Technologies' headquarters as part of an overnight facilities audit team. The building itself was a towering symbol of innovation, glass and steel rising confidently into the skyline. The kind of place Ethan had driven past 100 times without imagining he would ever step inside. Now he stood in the service corridor wearing a standard gray contractor uniform, a badge clipped to his chest with a barcode that granted limited access. No executive would notice him. No board member would glance twice. He was exactly what he had always been in the city's eyes. Background: Isabella remained off-site, communicating through an encrypted earpiece connected to a secure device routed through multiple masked servers. Her voice was calm, focused, different from the vulnerable woman he had met at midnight. Here she was strategic. "Take the freight elevator to level B2, she instructed softly. "Server archives are segmented. We don't need primary systems. We need the shadow backups." Ethan moved carefully, pushing a cart filled with toolboxes to maintain appearance. Security cameras tracked corridors, but contractors were expected. He kept his posture natural, resisting the urge to scan nervously. The first challenge came at a restricted hallway requiring dual authentication. Isabella guided him to a secondary access panel used for maintenance overrides during power testing. "They upgraded executive clearance," she explained quietly. "But infrastructure permissions remain outdated. No one suspects the plumbing logs." He followed her instructions, inputting a sequence that temporarily unlocked the corridor without triggering an executive alert inside the archive room. Rows of servers hummed steadily, their blinking lights reflecting faintly across metallic surfaces. Ethan had never seen data physically housed before. It felt strange to think that secrets capable of destroying lives existed in quiet machines stacked in orderly racks. Isabella directed him to connect a portable extraction drive to a designated port within a secondary backup unit. "Flight logs first," she said. "Encrypted copies are stored separately from financial disclosures." As files began transferring, Ethan's heart pounded louder than the machine's. Every passing second felt amplified. He imagined someone noticing unusual network activity, tracing it instantly. But Isabella reassured him. "This segment mirrors archival compliance backups. Access here appears routine." Minutes stretched. Finally, the first data block completed. They moved next to insurance policy revisions finalized weeks before the crash. Isabella had suspected those changes long ago, but she needed time-stamped internal approval chains. Ethan scrolled through digital folders as she guided him. Each document they uncovered tightened the pattern. Emergency policy adjustments. Executive signatures logged at unusual hours. Internal memos referencing contingency activation without her knowledge. Download the executive communication archive from 3 days before departure, she added. They believed I was distracted negotiating the Singapore expansion. Her tone carried no bitterness, only cold recognition. Ethan copied the files, aware that each transfer increased risk. Halfway through the final extraction, Isabella's voice sharpened slightly. Pause. I'm detecting internal diagnostic pings. Ethan froze. On a nearby monitor, a small notification flashed indicating back-end review of server traffic. It was subtle, almost dismissible, but not accidental. Security team, he whispered. Not yet, she replied. Most likely automated anomaly detection. But they'll escalate if activity persists. She instructed him to disconnect the drive temporarily and initiate a scheduled maintenance simulation from the console. Ethan followed, launching a routine systems calibration script displayed in the infrastructure menu. The server activity normalized on Isabella's monitoring interface. They assume it's environmental testing, she said after a tense moment. Continue, but faster. Ethan reconnected the drive, completing the final data transfer in record time. Before leaving, Isabella asked him to retrieve one more file, something she had hesitated to mention earlier. Board emergency session recording, she said quietly. It should not exist, but I stored auto archives months ago as leverage against shareholder disputes. He located the encrypted audio file and initiated extraction. As the progress bar filled, he felt the weight of what they were building. Not revenge. Evidence, proof strong enough to withstand courtroom scrutiny and public disbelief. When the download completed, Isabella exhaled softly through the earpiece. The first sign of emotional release he had heard from her. During the operation, Ethan restored the access panel to its original state and wheeled his cart back through the corridor. As he exited onto the main service floor, he noticed two security personnel near the central elevator reviewing a tablet screen. They did not stop him, but their presence was new. Isabella noticed his silence. They're tightening internal sweeps, she said. Your window here is closing. Ethan nodded subtly and maintained pace, refusing to rush. Only when he reached the loading dock and stepped into the cool night air did he allow his shoulders to drop. A black sedan waited discreetly at a distance, not for pickup, but as visual confirmation that he had cleared the building. Inside the car, Isabella joined him moments later, her expression composed yet charged with realization. We have enough to expose inconsistencies, she said, but not enough yet to guarantee conviction. Ethan handed her the secured drive. Then we finish it, he replied simply. She studied him for a moment, perhaps recognizing that the invisible man she had recruited was no longer participating out of obligation alone. He understood what was at stake now. Not just her empire, but the principle that power could not erase consequence. As the city lights flickered beyond the windshield, neither of them noticed the unmarked vehicle parked across the street, recording their departure. The hunters had sensed movement, and the margin for error had just grown thinner. The warning came faster than either of them expected. 2 nights after Ethan's first successful extraction inside Laurent Technologies, the fragile balance they had maintained shattered without ceremony. Ethan returned home later than usual, grocery bag in one hand and exhaustion in his shoulders, only to feel something wrong before he even unlocked the door. The hallway light outside his apartment flickered, and the door itself was slightly ajar. Not forced open, just enough to say someone had been there and wanted him to know it. His pulse surged instantly. He dropped the groceries and rushed inside. Drawers were pulled out. Couch cushions slashed. Kitchen cabinets open. It wasn't random vandalism. It was deliberate inspection. Noah? He shouted, fear ripping through him. No answer. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything he had ever carried on a construction site. His phone rang. The number was blocked. He answered with shaking fingers. A calm male voice spoke, controlled and almost polite. "Mr. Cole, curiosity is admirable. But involvement has consequences." Ethan's breath tightened. "Where is my son?" he demanded, voice cracking despite his effort to remain steady. The man paused briefly, as if appreciating the panic. "He's safe. For now. Consider this a reminder that accidents happen easily in large cities." The line went dead. Ethan felt his knees weaken, but forced himself to stay upright. He called Noah's school. No answer. Then another call came in, this time from an unknown local number. A female voice instructed him to go downstairs immediately. He ran. A dark sedan was parked near the curb. The rear door opened, and Noah stepped out unharmed, confused but physically safe. Ethan pulled him into a crushing embrace. "They said you were going to pick me up," Noah explained softly. "They knew your name." Ethan's stomach twisted. This was not random intimidation. This was precision. Within minutes, Isabella arrived, her face pale but composed. She had intercepted fragments of communication through the same encrypted channels she used for monitoring corporate chatter. The board had escalated their internal investigation after unusual server activity was flagged. While they had not yet confirmed Ethan's involvement, they had traced external proximity patterns linking him loosely to Isabella's escape night. The apartment intrusion was not about information. It was psychological warfare. A message designed to fracture resolve. Ethan's first instinct was to walk away entirely. "This is done," he said sharply. Once Noah was settled inside a temporary safe vehicle Isabella arranged. "I won't gamble my son's life for your company." Isabella did not argue. She nodded slowly, absorbing his anger. "You're right," she said quietly. "Your son is not collateral." That response surprised him. He expected persuasion, not agreement. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "That's why we changed strategy, not retreat." She had already initiated emergency protocols through an offshore asset structure untouched by the board's control. She secured a protected townhouse under a neutral identity, staffed discreetly by private security professionals loyal to her personally rather than to corporate payroll. Within hours, Ethan and Noah were relocated under temporary protection. The transition felt surreal. One moment, Ethan was cleaning broken furniture in his small apartment. The next, he was standing inside a secure property, monitored by armed guards. Noah sensed the seriousness, but trusted his father enough not to panic. Later that night, in a quiet room away from surveillance screens, Isabella faced Ethan without the armor of authority. "They're pushing because they're afraid," she said. "We extracted more than they anticipated." She revealed something she had hesitated to use earlier: the emergency board session recording Ethan had downloaded contained direct verbal references to the activation of fatal contingency. It was not a signed confession, but it was close. Combined with financial logs and insurance amendments, it created a prosecutable pattern. The only missing piece was confirmation linking executive approval to the aircraft sabotage contractor. Ethan listened, jaw tight. "So we're almost there," he said bitterly. "Almost doesn't protect my kid." Isabella's expression softened, not with weakness, but with clarity. "Then we stop reacting and finish it decisively." She outlined a bold final move. Instead of slowly leaking evidence through legal backchannels vulnerable to suppression, they would expose everything publicly in one controlled strike. During the upcoming global shareholder broadcast announcing permanent leadership restructuring, Isabella would interrupt the live transmission. Ethan, using maintenance credentials still active for one final window, would route the internal feed to external public servers before security could cut it. It was risky. Once exposed, there would be no retreat. But it would shift power instantly from quiet intimidation to global scrutiny. Ethan walked to the window, staring at the guarded perimeter outside. He thought about the men who calmly used a child to send a message. He thought about how power insulated them from consequences. Slowly, his fear reshaped into something steadier. Not recklessness, resolve. "They tried to scare me into silence," he said quietly. They picked the wrong father. Isabella met his gaze, understanding that this decision was no longer about corporate control alone. It was about setting a line. "Once we do this," she warned, "everything changes." Ethan nodded. "It already has." Upstairs, Noah slept unaware of the storm tightening around them. Downstairs, two unlikely allies finalized a plan that would either restore justice or place them directly in the crosshairs of men who had already proven they were willing to kill. The intimidation had failed. Instead of retreating, it had forged something stronger. And now, the final move was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. The morning of the shareholder broadcast arrived with an unnatural calm, the kind that often precedes irreversible moments. Laurent Technologies' headquarters buzzed with polished confidence as executives prepared to formalize what they believed was permanent control. News outlets were already positioned to cover the announcement, confirming Marcus Hale as acting chief executive moving forward. Inside the building, no one suspected that beneath the surface of rehearsed speeches and controlled smiles, a silent counterstrike was in motion. Ethan entered through the service entrance once more, wearing the same contractor uniform that had rendered him invisible before. His badge still functioned, just as Isabella predicted. Corporate systems rarely anticipate betrayal from the overlooked. His pulse was steady now, not because he felt no fear, but because fear had burned long enough to harden into clarity. Isabella remained in a secure, undisclosed location, seated before a controlled transmission setup arranged through independent media contacts who owed her personal loyalty. The evidence drive rested beside her. Financial logs, insurance amendments, executive communications, and the board emergency recording containing the fatal contingency reference. Everything they had gathered now rested on timing. "We have one window," she said through Ethan's earpiece, her voice composed but carrying weight. "Once they begin the broadcast, internal feeds will be prioritized. You'll reroute before they lock the system." Ethan navigated through the maintenance corridors toward the central network hub adjacent to the primary auditorium, on large monitors throughout the building. Pre-broadcast graphics displayed the company logo beneath. Solemn language about legacy and continuity. Inside the auditorium, shareholders and media representatives took their seats. Marcus Hale stood backstage reviewing notes with legal advisors, unaware that the woman he had declared deceased was seconds away from reclaiming her voice. Ethan reached the network control room used to balance streaming loads during high-traffic events. A junior technician glanced at him briefly, assuming routine maintenance. "Quick calibration," Ethan muttered casually, gesturing toward the console. The technician nodded and stepped aside, distracted by his tablet. Isabella's instructions flowed quietly through the earpiece. Locate the uplink management panel. Override internal lonely routing. Mirror to the public redundancy server. Ethan's fingers moved with deliberate control. Construction had taught him patience under pressure. Steel beams collapse when rushed. Data could behave the same way. The broadcast began. Applause echoed faintly from the auditorium as Marcus stepped to the podium. He spoke of resilience, honoring Isabella's vision, promising stability for investors. As he continued, Ethan initiated the reroute sequence. The system hesitated for a split second before accepting the command. "External mirror, live in 3. Isabella said calmly. 2, 1. On screens inside the auditorium, Marcus's image flickered. Confusion rippled through the audience as the display shifted abruptly. Isabella Laurent appeared. Gasps filled the room. Several executives visibly recoiled. The legal advisors froze. Security personnel looked at one another, uncertain whether this was a hack or a miracle. Isabella's face remained steady on screen. "Good morning," she began evenly. "For those who mourned me, thank you. For those who planned my death, this will be uncomfortable." The feed had already propagated to public servers. News outlets streaming the shareholder meeting were now broadcasting her image live across networks and social platforms. Within seconds, the world understood what was happening. Marcus attempted to signal technicians to cut the stream. But Ethan had already locked external routing. Internal controls were overridden by mirrored redundancy. Isabella continued, presenting time-stamped financial transfers, displaying revised insurance policies approved weeks before the crash, highlighting communication logs that contradicted official narratives. Finally, she played the board emergency session recording. The audio echoed clearly, references to activation, fatal contingency, and post-event consolidation. The language was careful but unmistakable when layered against evidence. Murmurs in the auditorium turned into open chaos. Security stormed toward the control room. Ethan saw them approaching through the glass panel. "They're coming," he said quietly. Isabella's voice did not waver. "Hold the line for 30 more seconds." Those seconds felt longer than the entire operation had. The doors burst open, and officers demanded he step away from the console. Ethan raised his hand slowly, but the stream continued. Isabella concluded her statement directly to shareholders and authorities, formally submitting all evidence to federal investigators already notified through independent channels. "You declared me dead," she finished calmly. But truth has a way of breathing. The feed ended only after confirmation that law enforcement had entered the building. Within minutes, federal agents arrived in response to the public allegations and pre-filed evidence packets Isabella had transmitted simultaneously. Marcus Hale attempted to leave discreetly, but was intercepted near the executive exit. The building that once symbolized untouchable authority now pulsed with exposure. Ethan was escorted out for questioning, but not as a suspect. Isabella's legal team had already identified him as a cooperating witness. By evening, news cycles were dominated by the revelation. Markets fluctuated wildly, then stabilized as interim oversight was established. Arrest warrants followed within days as forensic audits validated the digital evidence. Later that week, Isabella stood before cameras publicly, not as a resurrected icon, but as a survivor who had dismantled her own betrayal. She acknowledged the unnamed individual whose integrity preserved my life when power could not. Ethan watched from a distance, Noah beside him, unaware of the full scale, but proud of his father's quiet strength. When Isabella later offered him a permanent executive position, complete with wealth and security beyond anything he had imagined, Ethan declined gently. He chose mornings with his son over corner offices. Power no longer intimidated him, but it did not define him either. In the end, Isabella reclaimed her empire. Ethan reclaimed something deeper: the certainty that even invisible people can shift the balance of powerful systems. And as the city returned to its rhythm, one truth remained undeniable. She had been declared dead, but he had kept her alive. If you believe ordinary people can carry extraordinary strength, subscribe to Drew Daily Stories and share this story with someone who still believes kindness matters.